and welcome to part 2 of my video series on how to become a wildlife photographer. Now in part 1 of this series I actually set up a new bird feeding station around, well, probably about a quarter of a mile away from here, and that was simply because of the road noise that I would get from home. Now unfortunately, since I did that video, we've had extensive flooding here, and as you can probably see, I'm now at home to do this video. So I've set up a feed station here, and hopefully the road noise won't be too bad. I'm using a lapel mic, so I'm hoping that it won't pick up the noise of the A1 in the background. So yeah, what I wanted to do this week was really just dig into it a little bit deeper on how to set up a feed station, and really to start taking some images with my new budget-friendly wildlife setup. So anyway, that's what I'm going to do today, and hopefully you'll learn a few things, and hopefully we'll get a few shots. Now I may overlay some footage over this so that you can get a better idea of the feed station, because I don't want to use a shotgun mic, because I know that the sound quality will be absolutely terrible with the noise from the road, and I'm hoping this is a lot better. Now this is my new feed station. What I've set up here is just a pole feeder really. You can get these quite cheaply. I think this one cost me about 12 quid, and just a couple of feeders on there. At the minute I've got a feeder that's got general food in it, so when I first set up a feed station I don't want to be too specific, because I'm not really quite sure what's going to come to the feeders. So something that all birds will have a go at really, I put in first, and obviously down in the little tray here I've got something similar, sunflower seeds, just a general mix. Now I've got a peanut feeder up here. That's really been put up because a couple of days ago when I was looking out of the upstairs window, I'm sure I saw a great spotted woodpecker heading off in that direction as if it had just checked this out. And I didn't have a peanut feeder at the time, I just had a few peanuts in the tray down here. So I've put that up. Obviously if there's a great spotted woodpecker around, it might entice it onto this feeder. And at the minute, if I come down here, this is the perch that I'm using for the birds to come and land on. Now hopefully you can see that all it is, it's a piece of tubing, metal tubing, aluminium tubing, and I've just basically stuck this twig down into it. The reason it's taped here on this end is because I noticed when the birds were landing on it, it was a bit like a springboard, and it was just too springy. So if you're trying to take images over there, the birds don't land on it for very long. So if this is moving when they hit it, it basically never stops moving by the time that they've sprung off and gone somewhere else onto one of the feeders. So for that reason I've just taped it here, just makes it a little bit more secure, so that when they land on it they're more or less steady straight away, and you can get a few shots before they come off it. Now the reason I've set that up there, as you can see, this is the background I've got, and this has two functions really. Obviously it's the background, and if I'm looking from the hide direction this way, I want a nice background that's going to complement the bird. But the problem I had initially is I did set this feeder up, this pole feeder, further this way. Because I'm only using a 300mm lens, I really wanted it to pull it closer to the hide. When I'd got it here, what I found was the birds were coming from cover. That's the bird's cover that they're using. And what they were doing is they were coming from cover, coming halfway to the feeder and then going back under cover. The reason they were doing that is they didn't feel secure. We do have sparrowhawks coming over these back gardens, and to prove that, I had one come over this morning actually going in that direction. So the birds, what they want is some cover fairly close to where the perch is going to be, so that they can, basically they're making a calculation. Can I get to the food and then get back out into the bushes if a predator comes along and tries to surprise me? Have I got enough time to get some cover so that I've got a chance of getting away? And it was obvious that they were feeling, being further this way, that the distance was too far. Now what I may do over the coming weeks is just edge this way a little bit to see if I can get a couple more feet this way, and then what that'll do as well is when I'm taking pictures of the birds down here on this perch, this will throw the background further out of focus, so all this will then be even more blurry. I'm about 5 feet behind at the minute, but if I can get it 7 or 8 feet, I know this will be quite out of focus and it'll give a nice blurred background. So that's the current setup at the minute. Now what I would also say is, when you're first setting up your feed station, what you need to pay attention to is, as I say, put something, just a general purpose food on, I would initially. And what you'll find is, especially if you've set your feed station up at home, when you're doing stuff in the house, like you might be preparing a meal, and if your kitchen backs onto your back garden, you'll be looking what's on the feeders, and you'll start to notice A, what's on the feeders, and B, where they're coming from. So I know that the birds that come onto my feeder here, they generally come along the back fence and then they'll hop through this hedge here into this bigger section here, and that's where they'll all queue up waiting to come to the feeders. So that knowledge then tells me, you know, it gives me a lot of information about where the birds are coming from and what the bird species are. Now if I get to see a certain species coming on here, then I can change the food source to suit that bird, as I've done with this peanut feeder. And I'm going to give you a little tip in a minute for if you get goldfinches, something that I've done in the past. And if you're getting goldfinches onto your feeders, then this is a good one to do to get that classic goldfinch shot. So goldfinches, now if I notice that they're coming to my feeder, and I'm hoping that they're going to do this winter, because we do get quite a lot, what I will generally do is put up some Niger seed. Goldfinches absolutely love this, so I'll replace probably the peanut feeder with this Niger seed feeder. I've got loads of goldfinches coming to it, and there's going to be far too many goldfinches for the number of perches that are on there, so they're going to be queuing up to try and get onto that feeder. So then what I'll do is I'll put this teasel into this metal sheath here and stand it up, probably chock it so it's not moving around, so it's nice and sturdy. But then further what I do is, because I want the goldfinch to stand on the top of here while I take a shot, what I'll often do, and you have to be really careful with this, is make sure that the side that you're photographing from, there's nothing to show that you've done anything to the teasel, but round the back I'll often dig out a few of the spines and make a little well that I can put some Niger seed in. Now you have to be really careful when you're putting the Niger seed in, because if you try and tip it in, you'll get it all over the spines, and you can tell that's what you've done. So you have to be really careful putting the Niger seed in. And then once you've made that little well, obviously if a goldfinch is waiting to get on the feeder, it'll land on this, because this is what they normally, you see them stood on. It'll see that there's some seed in there, and it'll stop for a few seconds while you take a shot. So that's a really easy way if you're getting goldfinches to come to your feeder. And obviously again, you know, from this side, this is where I'm shooting from, so you'll set that up. I'll probably make that a little bit shorter so that it's a little bit lower down, depending on, because obviously depending on where you put that will depend on the view that you get of your bird. So if I was to put this, and this goes for any perch, if I put the perch here and the food's in that direction, a lot of the time I'm going to get the back end of a bird, which is what I don't want. But if I put it slightly to the rear of the food here, then generally what I'm going to get is the bird looking in my direction, or at least a sideward version, a sideward look of the bird, which is what I'm looking for. So you know, you have to be quite exact about where you put in your perches, so that you get that view that you're looking for of the bird, rather than something that you've set it all up and you've put the perch slightly wrong and they're all landing on it in a different way. And to be honest, you know, with this perch that I set up here, it's only by observing it from in the house that I'd seen that this was bouncing all over the place, and I came and immediately taped it, because if I hadn't, and I hadn't been looking at it, what I could have done is gone into the hide and wasted a whole session while the birds were bouncing up and down on this perch, and I wouldn't have gotten a sharp shot. So as I say, observation from inside the house is really important if you can do that. And you know, any time you can get to just watch for a few minutes what's happening, it's really worthwhile doing. So that's really all I wanted to say on the perches, hopefully. And if anybody's got any questions about other things that I might do, or questions about setting up perches, then please stick them in the comments below and I'll try to answer them as best I can. But it is really a case of improving your observation really, and using that time when you're not actually out in the hide, in the house, any time that you'll find you glancing out of the windows anyway to have a look what's going on. And you know, that will tell you what species of bird are coming, where they're coming from. You see, for instance, I've noticed that a lot of the sparrows tend to like to land on this here, and that would be a really cool shot with them on this. So it might be that I can utilize that, maybe move one of these further in that direction or over here, something similar, and that the sparrows will then take to landing on that, and you know, I can get some cool shots in that way. So it's all about observation and seeing what's happening, and then just adapting your shooting and your position to get that shot that you're after. Right, hopefully you can see the hide that I'm using. I'll just turn you around so you get a better view. Now this is an old tin shed. It wants thrown away actually, it's had it, but what I've done is I've emptied it out of most of the stuff that was in there, as you can see. There's just a few old trays down there. I've just put a seat in here. I've got my tripod with the Nikon on, and all I've done really is just covered it in some scrim netting all over it, down that side and down this side, and then I'll just drop that over and put the lens through. And this has been out here now for probably a month, so the birds are really used to it. So because they're used to it, you know, I can get in there quite easily and spend a couple of hours and have the birds quite readily coming to the feeders. So but as I say, anything that you've got on your garden, you know, a shed, a garage. I've even used in the past, when my daughter was younger, she had one of those trampolines. I've even set up underneath one of those before. So, but the birds were used to it, so it was there all the time. So yeah, it's anything that you can use, just use it. If you have to put something in the garden, obviously the birds have got to get used to it, and that will take some time. So it's always an advantage if you've got something that's readily there. Right, I'm hoping you can see these images. I've come into the hide now, or my makeshift hide. It's quite windy today, so it's not ideal conditions, and it's quite dark. I think we're going to get some rain in a bit. I've already got blue tips back on the feeder, so it just shows that they're quite happy that I'm in here, and that they're used to it. And as you can see, I've got the camera on a tripod. This is my big heavy duty tripod. The reason I use this is because I do some filming and it's got a fluid head. So it means I can get nice smooth footage. Obviously you don't need something like this, any tripod will do. I would suggest setting it up on a tripod, because if you think about it, you've set up where you want the birds to land, so you're not really going to be moving your camera around very much. It's going to be set on that position where you've set up for those birds to land. And if you've been doing your observation in the house, you'll know where they're landing on that perch, and you can just preset your camera up on it, and it'll just be micro movements, just to move about slightly when the bird lands on there to focus on the bird's eye. So yeah, tripod's ideal. If you're going to put your camera on a tripod, and like this lens has got image stabilization, what I'd suggest is you switch that off, because what can happen with image stabilization in lenses is that it's still trying to stabilize even though it's rock steady, and that can cause some blur into the image. So it's always best to turn that off. Some more modern cameras, I think there's some sort of sensor in there that tells them that they're on a tripod, and they'll automatically stop trying to correct the image. But on these sort of more entry-level setups, always best to turn it off if it's on a tripod, and then you're not going to have that problem at all. Shooting in aperture priority, as I said before. One thing I have done to the camera since I introduced it on the first video is I've taken the beep sound off, because every time it focused it was beeping, and obviously anything that's going to disturb wildlife, you know, you don't want to be out there in the middle of the countryside and got a roe deer in front, and then there's a massive beep when you've got it in focus and it looks up and runs off before you can get a shot. So yeah, any noise like that, just take it off if you can, and it's in the menus. You should be able to take that off so it's not doing it. As I say, aperture priority. Also shooting at high speed shutter, so I think this shoots at sort of 3 frames or 4 frames a second maximum, which isn't particularly quick. But what you don't want is to set it up so you're pressing the shutter one shot, pressing the shutter again another shot. You want to put your finger on the shutter and for it to just continually fire until the buffer on the camera is full. You know, if you've got that shot where the bird is where you want it and its head's not quite in the right position, it could be that just by continually shooting over that period of time when it's on the perch, you get that shot where it is exactly as you want it. So that's what I'd recommend. As I say, aperture priority. With this, it's a 5.6 lens when it's at 300mm, so that's not too bad at all, which means that I can throw the background out of focus. So what that means is, when you hear photographers talk about that, they talk about the bokeh of a lens, the bokeh, and all that really means is when you're focusing on something, say I'm focusing on a bird on that perch, if I've got an f2.8 lens, the background will be completely blurry. You won't be able to tell that it's a tree. It'll just be a palette of different greens all merged together, very, very blurry. Now if I shot that at f11, you'd be able to see every branch on every tree in minute detail because the depth of the field is so big. So at f5.6 it does render it quite out of focus. And that's what I was saying about bringing the perch further this way if I can. If the birds get used to it and get comfortable, bringing it a couple of feet further this way will not only mean that I don't have to crop the image as much with this by using this 300mm lens, because I'm going to be closer to the subject, so the subject will be bigger, but it means the background will be thrown further out of focus. So that's all stuff, you know, that you can play around with and try and, once the birds are used to it and come into it, then you know you can try these little, and what I'd do is suggest is doing it in small little bits. So if I move that 6 or 7 inches this way, they probably won't notice, and then if another week later I move it another 6 or 7 inches, but it's all throwing that further out of focus in the background and bringing the animal, the bird, closer to me. Camera wise, I'm really pleased with the way this is performing actually. It's not got a lot of the bells and whistles that I've got on my Sony A7r3, obviously not, but you know, I'm having real good fun actually getting some images with this, and you know, the quality of the images is very good. I've only got, as I say, blue tits at the minute, but I'm hoping over the next sort of couple of months what I should be able to do is move that feeder, the feeders closer to me here by a couple of feet at least, which will mean I won't have to crop the images as much, because this is quite a big sensor in this camera. What it means is, you know, you can crop up to say 40 or 50% and you've still got a really good size image to print off if you want to print it at A4 or whatever. So, you know, which is what most people would do. So yeah, you know, don't worry about having to crop the image, but what you've got to try and do is make sure that that setup that you've got is a nice pretty background and a nice pretty perch with the bird sat on it where you want it to. And one of the issues I had initially is when I set that twig up for the birds to land on, the bow of the twig was slightly in the wrong place, and what it meant was that the birds were perching onto the left of it and looking left, which meant that they were looking towards the pole of the feeder, and there was very little room. So what I actually wanted them to do was perch further to the right, and then when they looked to the left, which is what they're generally going to do because that's where the food is, I could crop and keep the feeders out of it. So I had to adjust the perch that I'd put in so that bump in the perch was further to the right as I look at it here, so that the bird could look in the direction of the food, and I'd still got room to crop it without getting the feeders in. So again, all these things that you learn as you're doing it. Well, that's at least one shot from today's session. It looks quite nice in the viewfinder. It's quite dull today, so I'm not expecting a lot. I'm getting a lot of blue tits at the minute, so nothing really exciting. Although I did see, again, when I was looking through the window the other day, a gold crest in that undergrowth behind the feeders, but they're incredibly difficult to get a decent shot of, and I've only seen it the once. Next door neighbour actually has got a big conifer at the bottom of the garden, and it flew back off into that, which is more where I'd expect to see it. But yeah, it's just one of those things where over time, you know, we will get different species coming, and as you do, you just adapt the feed that you're putting out, and obviously the weather will affect it as well. So just keep at it really, and as I say, any questions that you've got, please stick them in the comments below, and I'm more than happy to try and answer them for you. And yeah, I hope you have a good time with it, and I will see you for the next beginners video, which hopefully we should be in probably about a month's time. Right, I hope you've enjoyed this week's video, which is the second in my series on So You Want to Be a Wildlife Photographer. I'm not really going to take things very quickly with this, because I think, you know, when I first started, I could spend a whole year just doing this, you know, and there's so much that you can do from your back garden just shooting garden birds, because you'll get different ones come at different times of year. You can encourage different ones in by whatever plants or things that you put in your garden, so it really is a long-term project that you can just keep going back to all the time. So I don't really want to rush this, because I think this initial bit is where you get comfortable with your camera as well, and your settings, and moving things around depending on, you know, what the situation is. And then when we move away from here, you know, it'll be a lot easier for you to concentrate on the other things that I'm going to look at, rather than making sure that your camera settings are right. It'll just come naturally. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please give it a like, it really does help. And if you've not subscribed to the channel, then as I always say, please subscribe. Again, that helps. And I will see you in probably 3 or 4 weeks time for another beginners video. Cheers, bye.